everyone, and welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. Dylan Randazzo here to give you a review for Horizon, an American Saga Chapter 1. I apologize for not giving you a review in quite some time. I've taken a bit of a backseat on the reviews. As you've seen with this channel, I have officially moved. This is now my permanent shooting location, my original OG studio. And with that, I'm still trying to figure out overall in the long term what I want everything to look like, how I want everything to be presented. And on top of that, I've been running a retrospective for the channel on my Letterboxd and some videos on the channel. And I've been watching Picture This movies, Frame Rec movies, prepping for a new season of Big Brother, still trying to wrap up the last season of Survivor for Recipe for Reality, and keeping up a weekly Marvel podcast, on top of being a working server in New York City and a working actor. You know what? It's a lot. It's a lot to maintain, especially with film reviews, because also this year they've just been cranking out films left and right. I feel like every weekend there's 2 or 3 new films to see, and then another 1 or 2 on streaming, on top of like season 3 of The Bear and other things. It's a lot. It's a lot of media to consume. I don't want to use the C word. We don't use that word here. It's not that C word. It's the other C word, the one that rhymes with non-tent. Anyway, I just really am overwhelmed by the amount of stuff we're getting. But the retrospective is ending at the end of the month, and I just want to say right now, a little channel update. Everyone's asking me, what did you think of Inside Out 2? What did you think of Quiet Place? What did you think of I Saw the TV Glow? You said it was an amazing movie. You gave it glowing remarks, but you never talked about it on the channel. Well, guess what? I heard the criticisms. I've heard y'all out there. And I have committed in August, when the retrospective's done for 2014, in August, I will be giving you 3 reviews every single week, catching up on the films of summer 2024 and ending the month of August with my overall top 10 of the summer, because I have missed so many summer reviews. One of them being the one I'm going to be talking about today, which is Horizon, an American Saga Chapter 1. One of 4, one of 3, one of 2, one of 1. We will find out with time. But that is kind of why I wanted to do this one now. I just said I'm going to save a lot of reviews for August because I want to get my thoughts out there for a lot of other films, and I want them to ruminate on my brain even more, like Horizon already has. But there's an urgency to this review being the one that I'm putting out right now in July, in the middle of July. I'm waiting for August for all these big reviews, but why am I talking about Horizon right here and right now? It's probably because this is probably the last week you could probably catch it in theaters, and this is just an overall kind of existential crisis I'm having with this whole theater versus streaming debate. This idea that you have to make all your money on the opening weekend. If not, it's a failure, even though people seemingly ignored Elemental and If and these movies like Greatest Showman that got legs with time. There's a bigger crisis at hand, and that is that the recent news obviously broke that Horizon Chapter 2, which was originally supposed to be released in August, which I was very excited for, given my hype for Horizon Part 1, which I'll talk about in a sec. But Horizon Part 2 is not only not going to be on the slate, but there hasn't really been a date shown for when it might postpone to. We don't even know if it's postponed, and I think the just shocking announcement that it wasn't going to be on the schedule at all, it just was so much where I was like, you know what, I need to get my thoughts out here, because yes, I do want to review the first film and I want to talk to you and tell you why you should go see it, but also I want to talk about this overall strategy as a whole, because I haven't really talked about it on this channel. I think it's very interesting. First off, I do have a friend in the film, Larry Bagby, who plays the role of Bill Landry in Horizon American Saga Chapter 1. So that is also why I haven't been rushing to get a review out there, because it gets a little tricky when you're talking about a film that your friend is in, because if you really like the film, people just accuse you of only liking the film because you know someone in it, and if you don't like the film, you risk the very hard conversation of telling your friend why you didn't like their movie. Luckily, I really like this movie, and it's not because Larry is in it. Because Larry is in it, I like it a lot more than I would have liked it, probably, just because he really elevates what he is in the film. But I just wanted to get that out there first, because there is that tinge of bias. But if you've seen the film, you know that Larry is not in the entire film, so I am obviously looking at this film as a grander scope, not just looking at his scenes. But I did want to say that just out the gate before I talk even deeper on Horizon, just because I do have those biases going in of supporting a friend's work, if that makes sense, that I wanted to get out of there before people accuse me of only liking it because he's in it, or liking it more because he's in it. Listen, obviously I'm going to be enjoying it a lot more when I'm seeing my friend on screen, but I think this movie is a great film regardless of whether or not he's in it. But I just wanted to say that and to give him his due, because he is really great in the movie, and I'm very, very proud of you, Larry, my good pal. But yeah, back to Horizon, this overall release strategy. Kevin Costner Costner, he was on Yellowstone. He kind of got his notoriety back as the Western guy because he had only directed a few films. Dances with Wolves was a big one, a film I famously didn't like. If you go back to watch our Picture This episode for 1990, I didn't like that film very much, but he, got that Oscar. He was a big star, and then, we haven't seen him a ton in the last 10 years. He's popped up here and there, Hidden Figures, Draft Day, but he's kind of been behind the scenes. And then finally, Yellowstone was like his big return, especially in the Western genre. Became a big favorite amongst people, television watchers. Taylor Sheridan was involved. It's a very big production. And then he decided to make these Horizon films. These have been films that he's been brewing in his head for quite some time. This is not like a revelation. Oh, I should make this film. He's been thinking about these films decades and decades back, which is also part of the reason I love it, because it's clear that this is a passion project. But we'll get into my thoughts about the film in a sec. But the marketing strategy, he wanted to release a 12-hour film in 4 parts. 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours. There you go. There's your 12-hour American Saga. It's quite literally in the name. And a lot of people were quick to say, well, why wouldn't you just release this as a miniseries? And I think now with this upcoming news that it has been pulled from the release schedule altogether, has people once again saying, why wasn't this a miniseries? And I do think there are valid questions to ask in regards to the fact that there are a few different plots and they are a little bit separate in the first chapter. But because this is the first of 4 chapters, I do imagine that these plots are going to kind of merge into becoming a bigger, more cohesive whole, rather than just being a bunch of these fragmented episodic things. But I do see the idea of like the fact that it is a little episodic, this very first third or first quarter of the film. I see why people are quick to say, well, this could have just been a miniseries. You do a few different episodes and that could be, each story is a different episode. I get that. But I think it just comes down to the very basic nature of it coming down to artistic vision. And I think as much as we want to say this should be a miniseries because of what story it's telling, we also have to think about the director making it, the passion for it, and the medium they want it to be seen in. And Kevin Costner very clearly, deliberately said he wanted this to be seen on a big screen. He wanted this to get the cinematic treatment. It's not Yellowstone because it's a totally different vibe. And yes, while this may have episodic moments in the story, I think we immediately jump to the plot of it all and don't think about the other half of the motion picture being the picture itself and looking at it as a grand epic and seeing why it belongs on a big screen. So I totally understand why Kevin Costner, also when you're pouring so much money into something, you want to try to get that revenue back. And it's much easier to make money if you have people paying tickets for the movie than you do risking them signing up for a subscription service that they might already have. Like, I don't know if they were to drop this on like Hulu, for example, how many new people would join Hulu just to watch this film. And I think that's the big thing here. You got to think, yes, maybe they should have done this, they should have done that, they should have done this, they should have done that. And I think pulling it from the August release slot really kind of boosted those people's opinions. But I think there's something to be said about Kevin Costner just pouring his heart and soul into this and wanting it to be seen on the biggest, most epic scale possible. And having seen the film, I 100% agree. I think it's one of those films that almost requires the big screen. And I actually haven't watched Yellowstone. I'm very curious to watch that to see if that also feels like it belongs in a more bigger cinematic lens, or if it does cater itself to a more intimate, more episodic television nature. Because as much as we want to say they're one of the same, I mean, they all use cameras, they all use lighting, they all use production design, they all have acting, they all have scripts. But television and film are so different. And I think that's just kind of the bigger thing that I want to get across here, is that they set out to make a movie. They should be able to release it as a movie. And if you set out to make a mini series or a series, you should release it as a series. Now, there are exceptions. Moana was going to be a series. They decided to turn it into Moana 2, whatever. If they think they can make it work as one or the other, if they think that'll be more financially successful, that's kind of going the other way out. That's them saying, oh, I think we can make more money if we make it a movie. Here, I really just think if Kevin Costner, who has been around for a while and has been brewing this specific story and saga in his head for so long, wants to make it a movie and put his own money into it, then let him do it. And I think that's the biggest thing that I want to get across here. Now, the pushing of the film versus the pulling of the film is a very interesting conversation to have as well. Are they pulling the film altogether, and are they going to just release the other 3 parts as like Fathom events so you can see once in theaters and then they'll be on streaming or on digital forever? Or are they going to kind of put it as a mini series maybe on one of these networks. I really don't think or don't hope that happens. I hope they still get to see their full theatrical, runs come into light. But I do think there's something to be said about postponement. Now, the big fear is that they never said postponement in the actual release. They just said it's been pulled. Not necessarily that they had a plan of when they want to re-release it. They did mention they want to first get a bunch of steam for the first one building, which is also why I'm making this review now, because there's that vitality of wanting people to see it so that steam can build. But really, getting the ball rolling and getting people excited about the first part to then release the second part. Let the hype build a little bit. So if that's the road they're going on, of like wanting to really milk it out and make people love the first one so much that they need to see the second one in theaters, then I think it's going to be a great strategy. And I was actually talking to friend of the channel, JD Domash, about this too. If you release it even closer to Oscar season, you even have the potential of running it in some of the tech categories, similar to how American Sniper kind of appealed to that like older, a little bit more conservative demographic, that very particular kind of genre of movie that comes out around Christmas, where if you're not really in the mood to take the whole family out, maybe there's something you can go to, maybe a matinee or a late night showing, and just enjoy 2 or 3 hours of your own time. This could be that kind of American Sniper, and I'm giving JD credit because that was the comparison he made. But maybe release this toward Oscar season after Horizon has played a little bit longer in theaters. Give it the time to actually build the legs instead of saying, "Oh, it's been out for 2 weeks, it's not doing well, let's pull it." And that's just my big frustration about cinema at large. And I know there's this big debate of like streaming and theaters, and the people who love theaters are against streaming, and the people who love streaming are against theaters. And I think there's a very interesting balance there. I don't think it's black and white. It's not quite as binary as people want to believe. And I do fall in the middle. I am always a proponent of like let it play in theaters as much as it can until it finally really loses that steam, and then you can start to pivot to theaters or pivot to streaming. I think a lot of the time they pull the plug a little too early. Look at the Fall Guy. They pulled the plug, they put it on streaming, and then it started to actually build a little bit more legs and more buzz. And they went, oh, maybe we shouldn't have put it on streaming that soon. And I know the streaming people are a little bit more upset because they're like, well, we should all get to see it. And I get that sentiment too. But the thing is, you can see it. You can go to the theaters. And if it's too expensive, I understand. It's hard. Money's hard. But also, so many theaters are doing so much to make the films more affordable to see. They're doing these discount programs. You pay $20 a month. And if you see 2 movies at AMC, it pays for itself for A-list. There's other ways to make it more affordable for you. There are matinee prices that are cheaper on $5 Ticket Tuesdays. And this is just AMC. Other film chains have their own ways of making theaters more affordable. But I understand. Ticket prices are expensive. And also, families are tough to, maintain on its own. You might not have the time to go to the theater. I understand that. And there is a small majority that can't get out of the theater, and I understand that. That is a valid concern. But the thing is, once it's on streaming, it's forever on streaming, save for some of the lost films of the silent era and maybe a few other films like the original French Connection or the original Star Wars trilogy. Like, once it's out there for you to consume at home, you have it forever. You buy a Blu-ray, you have that till the end of time. You can't necessarily see every film in theaters to the end of time. Once that window is closed, for most films, you can never see it in theaters again, unless you're lucky and it's like 2001: A Space Odyssey and you get to see it every year in New York like me, and you live the best life. And I'm very, very grateful and very fortunate to see that masterpiece on the big screen every year. But if you're not 2001: A Space Odyssey, you're probably not going to be in theaters every year for someone to consume that way. So I look at it both ways. I get it. The streaming people have to wait, and it sucks to wait. But when you do wait and you get it, then the theater people can't see it again in the theater again. They only can see it at streaming. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, yes, you're losing 2 or 3 months maybe of being able to see it right away. But once you can see it, you can see it 9 million times in a row if you want. You can literally finish the movie and start it over again. You can't do that at a theater. And I think that's the thing that some people are losing sight of, is the fact that, if you can just wait 2 or 3 months, like, then you can have it forever and unlimited and as much time as you want, as many pauses or rewinds as you want. I get it. Theater and streaming is so different. Some people can't make it to the theater, and some theater people have struggles watching it on streaming. For myself, for example, I live in a household with 5 people who I love very much, 2 dogs that I love very much, but it is hard to just settle down and watch a movie and not have to pause or not have to take breaks or not have to watch it on a service that has ads, for example, like Tubi or Pluto or even Hulu if you don't have the ad plan, because not everyone has money. So it is a very interesting conversation to be had, whether something plays in theaters, when is the right decision to move it to streaming, and vice versa. All this said and done, I think studios should give a little more faith that sometimes word of mouth just has to grow and sometimes it takes time. And I understand when the market is so saturated and there's so many movies coming out all at once, it is hard to find those slots. It's like Despicable Me 4, we need to put it in 4 theaters because so many people are going to go see it. And Inside Out 2 is still so big. We need that in 4 theaters. We only have 2 theaters left. Horizon can only play one showing of one of those theaters. I get it. It gets tough, especially with the limited amount of capacity for all the films in capacity, which also begs another question. Maybe they should think about quality over quantity and release less movies in general every weekend. Maybe make one movie the new movie of the weekend and everything else, let it kind of fill in the gaps instead of saying we're going to release 4 films on this weekend. I just think that there's something interesting to be said about the way films are released. If you let something just sit in a theater for a little bit of time, it's gonna hopefully find the legs. And if it doesn't, then you put it on streaming, that's fine. But I think with Horizon, the problem is it came out on July 4th, right after Inside Out became like the biggest, animated movie of all time. And right before Despicable Me 4 would become like the second biggest summer movie of all time. So it's like one of those things where it came out at an unfortunate time, but to only give it 2 weeks and then say, we're pulling the plug on the second one, that was just really disheartening, especially as someone who loves the movie. I haven't even talked about the movie yet. I'm just kind of getting out my grievances on this overall theater thing. Um, but it is a little disheartening. Now, I get it. If they're waiting till later to really build the steam and get the word of mouth going for Horizon, that's great. The problem, though, is they're not necessarily doing enough to make sure people go out and see Horizon. There's a lot of methods the theaters could do to better advertise films that aren't the big blockbusters. You don't need to advertise Despicable Me 4. People are going to see it no matter whether they see a trailer or not. Same as Inside Out 2. I think something like Horizon requires a little bit extra marketing to really get people excited about it. In general, the studio could have done a lot better advertising it, but now that's part's done. They're done advertising it. Now, the goal is how are we going to get people to want to see Horizon Chapter 2 so much that they put it in theaters? Because the biggest fear right now is that they're just going to drop Chapter 2, 3, and 4 on streaming. The worst case scenario is that they have Chapter 2 come out because that's already filmed, and then they can't make chapters 3 and 4 because that's the whole thing is chapters 3 and 4 haven't been made yet. So the whole thing is it is my job now to convince you all to see Horizon Chapter 1 so you can give it that boost, so you can give it that fair shot to then hopefully get people excited for Chapter 2. Now, the biggest thing is that it is a very hard genre for some people to get into, myself included. Westerns, not really my thing. Not really my thing. But I think there's something to be said about a genre that is so tired that it reinvents itself. But then that reinvention becomes so tired that the original thing then feels new again. And that's kind of what Horizon Chapter 1 is. It is very classic. It's very schmaltzy. It's got that very grand, hoorah Western vibe that you get from like those, fantasized sequences in Toy Story where it's like Woody riding on Bullseye and he's like, fly like the wind, Bullseye, or whatever he says. It kind of gives you that feeling. It's kind of that spirit of adventure. It is very hokey and very cheesy, but when was the last time we had a Western like that? I think of all the Westerns in the last few decades. I mean, I think of No Country for Old Men and Hell or High Water, Wind River, a lot of the Taylor Sheridan stuff. It's so dark, and there's something really awesome about that. Is kind of like this neo-Western thing. But when was the last time we just had a grand classic Western again? And I think that's what Horizon Chapter 1 does best. It really harkens back to a time that was, a very classic staple of cinema, but because it's been gone for so long, a lot of modern audiences, especially in younger generations, the COVID generation, the Zoomers, if you will, they've never been, exposed to that stuff. And if they have, it's been these old black and white, films or these old films that they see on their TVs that they're like, that's kind of lame. But the thing is, I think there's something exciting to being able to see it in a big screen, see this kind of classic throwback type of movie, but in a modern sensibility. And I think that's what Horizon does really well too, is that the technology is great. So obviously the film looks great. It looks better than those older Westerns because you now have the advancements of technology. You have the budget to really just span through these gorgeous landscapes, but also bring so much detail to the costumes and the production design and making these areas feel lived in. I think there's also something to be said about the politics of it too. This does kind of deal with a lot of the older tropes that have become kind of dated, more problematic tropes in the genre, being, the way they treat indigenous people in Western films, the way they treat women in Western films. And I think this film in particular kind of assesses the genre in a very interesting way where it approaches it from a classical lens, but it does it in a sharper technology to where it just looks fresher and newer. And the actual women characters and indigenous characters of the piece are really given their voice here. And yes, there are, obviously clashing, villains and heroes with every Western. And sometimes those heroes are the white guys, and, that just is what it is. But I think it does a good job about acknowledging a lot of the faults of these classic kind of genre heroes. These cowboys, are they heroes? Or are they more of the anti-heroes? Are they maybe even the villains of certain stories? And who are the people that we should be paying attention to in this overall landscape? And I think that's something really impressive for Kevin Costner. And that's something that I admire with Dances with Wolves, even if I don't love that film, is that he tries to at least give a voice to the indigenous people in that film. He makes it about trying to understand their language, understand their culture. And I think he does it similarly here too, especially from the women angle, because there are so many great story beats here. I mean, Sienna Miller, her character, her arc is actually my favorite story of the film. The film is kind of fragmented with these different stories, and I get that's why everyone's saying it should have been a miniseries. It should have been a miniseries. Listen, he wanted to make a movie. It's a movie. But I do think that episodic nature. I think Sienna Miller's story really shines the most. These stories are all about these different people, and how they have gone through their own struggles and their own hardships and their own conflicts, and eventually, each kind of character has this poster for Horizon, this like land beyond that they are all striving to kind of come together and reach. It's almost like kind of a promised land type deal. They see these flyers for Horizon, a new beginning or whatever. It's a little cheesy. Again, it's cheesy, but that's kind of the vibe. That's what you want to see out of a movie like this. And so you see how each character kind of goes about finding their objectives and finding their goals, which I assume will be carried out over parts 2, 3, and 4. That's really exciting. And I think knowing it's a part 1 also helped as well. There's so many films that hide the part 1 of it all. Dune being an example. Wicked is coming out, and it's very much trying to hide the fact that it's a part 1. And a lot of the times for audiences, that can become annoying where they're like, oh, this is only a part 1. You didn't tell me. But I like how this is advertising it out the gate, so that it's only the first part of it, and they even show a clip show of part 2 at the end of it to get you excited for part 2, and it certainly got me excited, especially the introduction of a cast member that I was waiting to see, never saw, but then saw in the preview for part 2 and was very excited. A certain mustachioed villain that I'm very excited for. But I really like how, this really just kind of sets the groundwork, because we have 12 hours of this thing. You don't want to rush too far into the story because you want to still let it breathe. It is a Western. So when you go to a Western, you want to kind of live in those spaces a little bit more. You want everything to be slightly more drawn out and dragged out, because that also adds to the suspense. There's a really great scene between Kevin Costner and Jamie Campbell Bower. Yep, Vecna himself. They have this really great little standoff, and in a normal traditional kind of Western, you would think it would kind of get to the shootout a lot quicker than it does. But I like how this kind of sits with the dialogue, and that's another thing where it still is classic to the genre, but it feels new in the sense that these scenes are breathing even more, because they have the real estate to tell the story in a bit more of a dragged out process. I think the actors also have a great sense of who their characters are. I mean, this cast is stacked. You have Luke Wilson in a great supporting role, Sam Worthington, as I've already said many times, Sienna Miller, Kevin Costner himself, I honestly think is the least like surprising revelation of the film, only because he's kind of just doing his Kevin Costner thing. But again, that kind of harkens back to the old tradition of it. I kind of like the almost kind of very classic, sturdy performance from him, because also he's the director, so he's also tackling a lot more stuff. So if he's like the straight man of this whole thing, the more straight laced guy, like I don't think that's necessarily a problem. Will Patton's great, Jamie Campbell Bower, Jenna Malone, so many great people, Michael Rooker, Abby Lee. It's really exciting. Danny Houston, another one. But it's really great to see them kind of like tell us what their ambitions are, what their goals are, so then now we can get going. We can really, take off. And I get it. A lot of people are saying this feels like a pilot episode. And in a way it is, because it's the first of 4 series. But I mean, would you say the same about Fellowship of the Ring? It literally ends with them all like, let's continue on our adventure, and I think that's the thing, is like, I think if you just look at it as a series, a film series, that's fine. It could still be a series, but still being a cinematic series. It doesn't need to be a television series. Like, why isn't Lord of the Rings a television series? Because Peter Jackson made 3 big epic movies, and this is the same thing. It's just 4 movies instead of 3, and I hope they make all 4. And that's my biggest thing, is like, I really think this film deserves the eyes, because it is entertaining. It's 3 hours, but I think it moves by quickly, because you also have a lot of different stories. It never feels like we're living in the same story for too long, when it feels like it's slightly overstaying its welcome. It jumps into the next story, which I think is important. Yes, the stories right now feel disjointed, but because they all kind of have that similar tinge of like they're all getting to Horizon. There's this common thing, this objective, this tangible thing that they're all trying to get to. I think that gives a great kind of purpose for the audience to stick with it, even if it feels a little fragmented now. And that's why I really, really hope we get parts 2, 3, and 4. We know we're getting to in some facet because it's already been made, edited, everything. And it was supposed to come out next month, which is just so crazy. I wish they did it, but I get it. If they want to really build the steam and really hopefully get a very successful box office outcome out of part 2, they need this time to really build the hype and love for part 1, because critics were a little mixed on it, audiences a little more so mixed on it. And I think a lot of the times people will just narrow it down to it's really long and it should have been a miniseries. But the thing is, if it was a miniseries, it would still be that long. 3 episodes would still be 3 hours. And that's the thing. It's like you'll sit through 2 hours and 40 minutes of Planet of the Apes. It's only 20 minutes longer. And I think that's the thing that I am struggling with, is why people don't have just that extra 20 minutes of patience. And honestly, if you don't, then come late. Don't sit through the trailers. Or, if you have to, leave when the credits start rolling, even though I'm also a proponent of sitting through the credits. Again, I think there's a way to make this a successful series, and I hope by me pouring my love for the film out here into the YouTube verse that more people want to see it and want to take a chance on it. Again, it's not really anything plot wise that you haven't seen before, but the characters themselves that would normally get marginalized are given much more agency, like the women characters and indigenous characters. And I do think the actual technical marvel of it all really does elevate beyond anything we've seen before. And there's some charm, obviously, to the older stuff, the Sergio Leone era. It's amazing. But I think there's something to be said about like getting this real crisp 2024 technology to create a passion project that was originally conceived in the 80s by Kevin Costner on a notepad and a dream. And I just think it's one of the great films of the summer, and I really hope people take a chance on it, because I was definitely enthralled by all 3 hours. There's so many great sequences. There's almost horror-esque sequences, especially in some of these standoffs where you're not sure who's going to shoot first. There's real tension built in there. There's real emotional stuff. There's romance. There's kind of this humorous angle with this British couple amongst all these Americans, but then that becomes something a little bit more serious, setting up something that could be really, really interesting and dangerous in part 2. That's the thing. I think it's really setting up some very interesting little pockets, but each pocket is uniquely stuffed. They're all on the same set of overalls. The overalls are all denim, but inside the pockets you've got different fabrics, and I really, really love that. I don't know where overalls came from, but I've been talking too long on this. The film is long, so go see it. But I promise you, you'll find something to like in it. I think, whether it's just enjoying the visuals, whether it's enjoying the score. I mean, John Debney cooked with this score. This score, easily my favorite of the year so far. And that was someone who came out of Challengers saying this is the score of the year. I'm going to say right now, this is my favorite score of the year so far. But I really do think that this is a film not to be missed. And if you can see it in a theater, please do, because I really do think they need the box office. And normally I don't get on here and say like, you need to support this in theaters. But I think when you have this passion project, it's very rare that we see cinematic passion projects like this with someone just pouring their heart and soul into something so big. The last thing I can think of on this level really is like Richard Linklater with Boyhood, spending 12 years making a single film and pouring his heart and soul into 12 years and all the different things that could go wrong. This is on that level. It's just a little different. He's filming stuff in a smaller period of time, but he's releasing it in 4 films. The idea that you could see a film and then the very next month see the sequel is something we haven't really seen since the Matrix movies. There's something very exciting about that I wish this film had. Now it doesn't, because part 2 is delayed, or it's wiped from the slate. I hope it's delayed and not wiped completely. But I really do think it deserves the eyes. And if that is through streaming, then it's through streaming. And I hope that people see it on streaming and at least can appreciate the scope enough to want to see it part 2 in theaters. So my hope is that Horizon 2 will see the light of day, especially by the end of the year. If not, hopefully sometime next year. And then I hope parts 3 and 4 are made. I hope it gets made, because I really do think this is a very fascinating group of characters. It's a really interesting twist on a Western thematically, while still staying true to what a Western is in its bare bones. If you like the classic Westerns, you're going to love this. I really do think you will. And if you don't, then you don't. And you know what? It's not for everyone. But I do think, because this is such a big swing and such a big risk, I think we as film lovers and cinephiles owe it to cinema itself to really appreciate when blank checks are really cashed. And I really, really hope that, enough people can support the passion that's behind this and rally behind it like I have. And once again, very proud of my friend Larry for crushing it in this role. I wish there was more of you, Larry. I wish you were in more of it, but who knows? Maybe they'll find a way to bring you back for the sequels. And if that happens, then we're getting into like some sci-fi time travel territory, which would be even cooler. And hey, sign me up. I don't even know where this Horizon chapter is going to go. Part 2 could suck. Part 3 and 4 could suck. I don't know, but I really like part 1, and I hope people see it. So that is my review for Horizon and kind of my overall thought on the idea of scrapping it all together and why people should support things in theaters. I hope if you're a studio, not that you would be listening to this, but I hope you give it a shot to at least keep it in there a little bit longer and hope that it can find legs. Look at Top Gun, look at Oppenheimer, Barbie, all these movies that with time made so much more money than they would have if you just took it away the first weekend. And I get it. They made a lot the first weekends, but some films don't. And some films need time to just get legs and go out there. So if you have a screening near you, please try to go see it. I love it, and let me know in the comments how much you loved it. And if you hated it, let me know in the comments, but please keep it respectful, especially because my friend Larry is probably watching. So thank you so much, and check out, as I said, in August, I am going to be doing reviews for all the summer films that I have not done reviews for. Inside Out 2, Quiet Place Part 1, both the Shyamalan films, the father and daughter. I'm very excited to talk about all of it, because I do want to get my thoughts out on all these films, because that is what I love to do most, is review movies. And that's what I want to do here, and prop up especially movies I love. There are going to be some movies I'll talk about that I hated, but hey, that's a part of criticism, right? Telling you what I liked and what I didn't like. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to feel the same way, but at least it can hopefully be a guide. Hey, let me be your guide. I'll be your Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. Won't say it a third time. That's coming in October. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe, like this video, comment, share it with your friends. Go to our TikTok. Our TikTok is popping off. It's really exciting. We're trying to grow this channel as big as we can. And stick around for our other shows here on the channel. Picture This, Frame Rack, Recipe for Reality, Marvelous Movie Mondays, Draft Day, and so much more. We are in the midst of a retrospective, so check us out on Letterboxd, where I'm doing daily reviews for movies of 2014, as well as some specialized reviews here on the channel. You might be getting another one later this weekend or early next week on a film that no one asked me to review, except for one guy. If you know, you know. But please stay tuned for my review of The Nut Job. That's all I'll say. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.